All right, let's have the honest conversation about founder pay. You know, the one number every founder dreads, the one that happens in whispers, if it even happens at all. And for good reason, right? Because getting this wrong can sink your company before you even get started. But what if there was a way to get it right? A data-driven way? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down today. So picture this. You have spent months, maybe even a year, just grinding it out. You're pitching, you're negotiating, you're living on ramen noodles, and then finally, you close the round. The wire hits the company bank account. I mean, that feeling is incredible, right? It's pure relief, pure excitement. But that feeling lasts for about 10 seconds. Because right after that excitement, someone, maybe it's your co-founder, your partner, an investor, they ask the one question you have absolutely been avoiding. So, what are you paying yourself? And if you're like most founders, you just freeze. You have no idea, you're completely flying blind. I'm willing to bet every founder has done that 2 a.m. Google search, right? How much should I pay myself? And the advice you get back is a total mess. One article says take nothing to show your commitment. The next one says take a market rate so you don't burn out. It honestly feels like you can't win. But here's the secret. The problem isn't a lack of answers, it's a lack of data. And that's what changes today. Okay, first things first, we have to get one thing straight. Your salary, it is not just a personal finance decision. It's a critical business signal. It's something investors look at very, very closely, especially when you're not in the room. So here's how investors think about the extremes. If you pay yourself way too much from an early stage round, let's say over 250 grand, they see you treating their capital like a lifestyle subsidy. But, and this is the important part, if you pay yourself nothing, they don't see commitment, no. They see a burnout risk and, honestly, just poor planning. They know financial stress absolutely kills focus. And these right here, these are the exact red flags that come up in their partner meetings after you've left. If your pay is eating up more than, say, 8 to 10% of the cash you just raised, that's a huge concern. If you give yourself a massive raise the day after the money lands, they see that as opportunistic, not earned. And that whole $0 salary flex, yeah, most experienced VCs don't see sacrifice. They see a founder who's about to flame out, and that's a risk they don't want to take. So, enough with the vibes and the signals. Let's get to the hard numbers. We can finally stop guessing because the data from actual payroll platforms is now clear enough to give us a real data-driven answer. So here it is, the number you've probably been waiting for. Based on actual payroll data from hundreds of startups, we're not talking self-reported surveys here. The average founder salary last year was $161,000. Let that sink in for a second. This isn't a guess. This is the benchmark. And the fact that it's up 14% from the year before, that shows you that as the market recovers, investors expect founders to be paid fairly. But, you know, average isn't really enough. Your funding stage is what really matters. So if you're at the seed stage, your starting point is right around $147,000. Just raised a Series A? Well, that number jumps up to over 200 grand, and then it goes up again for Series B. So find your stage on this chart. That right there, that's your data-driven starting point for this whole conversation. Now, these benchmarks are your North Star, for sure, but they're not the whole story. To really get this right, we need to layer in some crucial context and talk about a few really common traps that founders fall into, even when they have the right data. And first up, context is everything. And right now, the context is AI. I mean, just a year ago, AI founders were a tiny fraction of the startup world. Today, they represent 40% of new companies in this data set. This isn't just a trend, people, it's a tidal wave, and it is fundamentally changing salary expectations. So why are they earning this premium? Well, it boils down to 3 simple reasons. First, AI companies just raise bigger rounds earlier because they have to pay for massive computing costs. Second, investors are so bullish on AI right now, they're a lot less price sensitive on what the founders get paid. And third, the talent market for top AI founders is absolutely brutal. Investors would much rather pay to keep them focused than have them distracted by calls from recruiters. Okay, this next one is a trap that can literally cost you thousands of dollars, so listen up. If your company is set up as an S-Corp, you need to know these 2 words, reasonable compensation. It's an IRS rule that says you must pay yourself a fair market salary before you take any profits out of the company as a distribution. Why? Because salary and distributions are taxed very differently. So here's the bottom line. If you try to game the system by paying yourself a tiny salary and taking huge, lightly taxed distributions, the IRS can come in, reclassify all of it as wages, and then hit you with a massive bill. We're talking back taxes, penalties, and interest. Oh, and that mythical 60-40 rule you might have seen floating around online, the IRS has never ever endorsed it. Don't fall for it. Now let's switch gears and talk about the gender pay gap. The data shows it is absolutely real, but the good news is it's shrinking. As you can see here, the gap was a staggering $45,000 back in 2020. Today, it has narrowed all the way down to about $11,000. That's a huge improvement, but clearly there's still more work to do. So what's driving this change? This chart shows it perfectly. Female CEO salaries are actually growing at a faster rate. We're talking nearly 18% year over year compared to about 14% for male CEOs. And what this tells us is that increased transparency and publishing data openly, just like we're doing right now, is exactly what helps close these gaps over time. Okay, so we've covered the data, we've covered the context. Now let's talk about how to apply it by looking at what not to do. These are the most common mistakes that can turn a great funding round into a total disaster. Let's just run through these because each one is a landmine. First, the martyrdom play, paying yourself nothing. Once you're venture-backed, this just signals poor planning, not sacrifice. Second, stop comparing your salary to your friends at Google. Their comp doesn't include the massive equity upside that you have. Third, have the hard conversation about pay with your co-founder early. Don't let resentment build up and poison that relationship. Fourth, don't just spike your salary the day after funding. Phase it in, tie it to milestones. And finally, the big one, never ever forget your runway. Your salary directly impacts how long your company can survive. All right, so after all of that data and all those warnings, what's the actual playbook? Let's put everything together into a simple, actionable framework that you can use right now to set your salary with total confidence. So here we go, 5 simple steps. Step 1, start with the benchmark for your specific stage. We just covered this. It's your data-driven anchor. Step 2, adjust for your role. A CEO might make a bit more than a CTO at this stage, so tweak accordingly. Step 3, adjust for location, but only if your whole team is in a really high-cost city. Step 4 is the most critical, the runway check, and we'll dig into that in a second. Does this salary put your company's survival at risk? And finally, step 5, document your logic. Seriously, write down why you chose this number. Your future self, your board, and maybe even the IRS will thank you for it. Let's just double-click on that runway sanity check because it is the most important guardrail you have. Your runway is simply how many months your company can survive before it runs out of cash. At the seed stage, a really good rule of thumb is that your total compensation for all founders combined should not be more than 5 to 8% of your company's total annual spending or its burn. This simple math keeps your personal finances aligned with your company's survival. So what's the big takeaway from all this? The founders who really succeed, the ones who get this right, they aren't the ones who pay themselves the most or the least. They're the ones who are thoughtful. They use data, they understand the signals they're sending, and they make a mature decision that balances their own needs with the health of the business they're trying to build. At the end of the day, founder pay isn't some dark art or a great mystery. It's really just a math problem. And it's a math problem with known inputs, your stage, your role, and your runway. The data is finally out there. So the only question left is, are you ready to stop guessing and start using it?